everybody! It's me, Northernlion, noted A20 champion with all 3 characters. In Mega Crit Smash Hit 2019 Game of the Year, Slay the Spire. Where's the Slay the Spire been? I beat it. I never want to see A20 runs ever again. It took me like literally 6 months to beat it with 3 characters. Now, mind you, we mixed in some dailies in the interim period, but still. But what I will do is rate every card as the silent, for the silent, while not being silent. Now, several months ago, I rated the Ironclad cards after winning A20. It was off camera. A couple weeks after that, rated every defect card after beating the game with the defect off camera. Finally, all 3 have been done on camera, and that was my first A20 victory with the silent ever. So, mostly the purpose of this video is to give you a framework to evaluate cards and Slay the Spire, but also, like, if you're better than me or you pretend to be better than me, it's a lightning rod for you to laugh at. And I can laugh at myself, too. I mean, we have a 0.6% win rate, maybe, on A20. That's pretty low. But it's infinitely higher than it was 2 weeks ago. Let's get started. Card library. I guess we should do the common cards at some point, too. Is wild for me as well, because I have not played Slay the Spire in 2 weeks. I played a little bit on Switch just to, you know... Playing, like, A5 runs is a dream come true. Playing, like, A20 runs. When it works, it feels amazing. To be honest, I did kind of want to die a little bit for parts of them, though. Okay, I'm not going to rate Defend and Strike. Suffice to say, all ratings will be out of 5. You know the deal. A 0 is like, I never take it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. A 5 means I always take it, even if it's not necessarily good. So it's an unhelpful video, let's put it that way. It's for entertainment purposes only, no copyright infringement detected. 2019 copyright symbol. All I'll say about these is if you're going to be playing through the lens of I want to win on A20, both Strike and Defend are interesting cards in the sense that you really, to get through the first floor elites, this is actually a surprisingly important thing. You need attacks. You're never against the Gremlin Knob, against the Lagavulin, even against the Obelisks. You're never going to outpace them on defense that early, I think. So having offense is important. So I think maybe Strike might be a little bit more valuable early on as the silent later in the game, but you know it's Strike and Defend. Neutralize, dude, is a weird thing to evaluate a card that is in your deck by default. But this is typically, depending on when you get your first campfire, it might be your first upgrade target. Weakness is really valuable. It's a 0-cost attack on top of that, so it synergizes with a lot of relics. Kunai, Shuriken, Nunchuck, etc., etc. It's got a solid upgrade. It gets rid of artifacts. I'm inclined to give Neutralize somewhere between a 3 and a 4. Let's call this a 3 for now. Survivor. I would actually be inclined... I'm going to give this a 2, okay? 8 block... And remember, I'm coming off of A20 here, so my evaluations are a little bit more focused on that, which is not to even say that they're necessarily more accurate, but just from the perspective of trying to beat enemies that you face on A20. 8 block versus 5, especially early, is a meaningful difference. Discard is actually way more valuable than I ever gave it credit for. I feel like a lot of the time I was of the opinion that... you know, discard only really allows you to get a synergy going with Sneaky Strike or Tactician or something like that. But in reality, just being able to discard curses in particular is very helpful. And basically, this can help buy you a little bit of time by, you know, maybe you have an event early that puts a curse in your deck. Well, Survivor sort of mitigates the pain until you can maybe remove it at a shop. So I'd be inclined to give this a 2. I think it's definitely, you're going to play it like for probably 100% of like your first floor battles. So Acrobatics is a weird card for me to evaluate because I highly disrespected it. But then it actually came very much in handy for me. If there's one, and there's a lot of problems in the old cerebral cortex up here, but if there's one systematic problem I had with the silent, I very much undervalue, and with every character for that matter, I very much undervalue draw. and this is for real, I'm not joking with you. When I look at a card like Acrobatics and it says 1 energy, draw 4 cards, discard 1 card, my brain says I'm throwing 1 energy in the trash can. And I don't think that's fair. We had Acrobatics in our winning deck. I don't even necessarily think this is like a build-around card. That's the other thing. When I see draw or discard, I sometimes think to myself, oh, you know, well, like if we don't have something like, I'm trying to think of the names of the relics, but, you know, you discard a card, do 3 damage to a random enemy. Discard a card, you get 3 block. You get the general gist of it. Then I was thinking, like, this is literally useless. But in reality, I would call this a 2 out of 5 as well. And I would actually maybe even give it a little 2+. I think that this could actually fit in pretty much every deck. You're not going to play it, I think, every time it shows up. But being able to get to your neutralize fast early on, being able to get to your bullet time if you got 4 energy, so then you can play way more cards in your hand. I think having 1 or 2 of these in a deck is fine. Backflip. I hate to say it. I'm going to give Backflip a 2 as well. Because I used to think this was like a 4 out of 5 card. And I mean, if you evaluate it versus Acrobatics, essentially, I wouldn't consider the discard from Acrobatics to be bad. I would probably consider it to be neutral to good most of the time. Which might not be realistic now that I think about it. But hey, it's my video, you know? So Backflip, I mean, you're basically gaining 5 block and 1 less draw. It's still pretty good, but I feel like I overrated this, and 5 block is not that spectacular. Draw 2 can be pretty useful, but 5 block itself is not that useful. Doesn't get that much better on an upgrade. I'd be inclined to give this a 2, but that's not to say I wouldn't add them to my deck. Now, Bane is an interesting card. If you have no poison, you should not take Bane. It gets an X out of 5. It's slightly better than an unupgraded strike. If you have poison, should you take Bane? That's a very good question as well. I think it depends on a number of factors. The size of your deck, you know, how reliable you can get poison before you draw Bane, where you're at in the game, etc., etc. But I will say, early on, first floor, being able to do 14 damage to an enemy that also has poison on it for 1 energy is extremely good. So I'm going to give, I know I'm giving out a lot of 2s. I'm going to give Bane a 2 yet again. But that's a 2 with a little question mark next to it. And the question mark is, you know, it's a, you know, buy high, sell low sort of situation. I think early on this is very, very valuable. In the late game, you know, maybe you're fighting a boss with 250 HP, not necessarily that valuable. But if you're racing against the Gremlin Knob, being able to do 14 damage to him and still have 2 more energy left to do more attacks, like really, really useful. Blade Dance. Interesting card. I'm going to be honest, I overrated it. I think I overrated it a lot. At base level, it's 1 energy for slightly better than a strike. It's basically an upgraded strike, which is okay, but where it really shines, the Silent I really think has not necessarily that many cards that are always good. But it's got a lot of cards that are, depending on what other cards you have in your deck, become much better. Blade Dance is an obvious example, you know? If you have, if you've already taken an accuracy, well, why would you have done that? But I guess Blade Dance is like the opposite. It enhances other cards. Sometimes I would add one of these to my deck, or hit my knee on a freaking desk, dude. As you can tell, I'm the right man for the job here. Careful, considerate movement of my limbs and my cerebral cortex for non-stop objective card analysis. Okay. Blade Dance. I think if you have choke, if you have accuracy, if you have 1,000 cuts, this becomes pretty much something that can be the bread and butter of your deck. You know, this can be the starch on the side of your plate. It can be the meat. I don't know. It's every part of the dinner at this point. But if you, the trouble for me became, if I wanted to roll a Shiv deck, what piece do you add first? You know? That's really what, because you want it all to come together simultaneously, because Blade Dance agnostically is not that great. You know, but if you don't end up with anything that enhances Shivs or, you know, gives you a bonus for card play, it's not necessarily that valuable by itself. So I'm going to put this in at a 1 level, but it definitely becomes much, much better if you already have the other pieces available. But would you have the other pieces available if you didn't have this in your deck to begin with? Because this shows up at the common level. I don't know. Cloak and Dagger. I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm giving this a 4. I think this is one of the better commons as the silent. You don't necessarily need more defense in your deck early on, but basically 1 energy, 4 damage, 6 block. It's a pretty good value. Upgraded, it's basically like playing a better strike and a better defend simultaneously. And everything that I said that applied to Infinite Blade, not Infinite Blades. I've already forgotten. Blade Dance, there we go. It already applies to Cloak and Dagger as well. So anything that gives you a bonus for playing cards. You know, anything that gives you a, like if you have Panache, for example, is another good example of a colorless power that actually could make this even better. But I really think Cloak and Dagger, I rarely hesitate to add at least a couple of these to my deck. The downside is that the upgraded version doesn't give you any extra block. It does give you 4 extra damage, which is more than you get out of most upgraded offense cards, at least basic or common upgraded cards. And it also gives you 1 more card to play, which could be terrible, I guess, if you got Velvet Choker, but hey man, you're the architect of your own demise. So I'm going to give Cloak and Dagger a 4. Dagger Spray is a very interesting card. Used to overrate it greatly. Here's the thing I'll say about Dagger Spray. I think it's like a 1 or a 2, but you have to have some form of AoE early, in my opinion, to beat A20. A lot of the worst encounters on the first floor are not, you know, one single enemy that wears you down, at least for me. It's, hey, there's 6 gremlins. Hey, there's 4 gremlins, you know? Those are really, really, really tough. So having a Dagger Spray is not your favorite AoE option, but is useful nonetheless. So early on, I would say maybe this is a 3. Once you get past the second floor, I would probably never add, or once you get past the first floor, I would probably never add one of these to my deck unless I had no other choice. But yeah, early, good. Late, not so much. But still having one of them in your deck, even if you have to carry it as baggage for the rest of the game, it's not the end of the world. Dagger Throw is another card I think I very much disrespected. You look at it, you go, it's 1.5 strikes. But it's so much better than 1.5 strikes, which is why I'm going to give this a 3. By the way, I have not thought of any of these scores. I'm going off gut. It's part of my problem with this game in general, I guess. Until the end, I didn't do as much analysis as I should have. But anyway, 9 damage is good. It's, you know, having 3 extra damage is enough to make a difference. It can kill an enemy a turn faster and save you from taking a big hit, potentially. But the draw 1 discard is basically, if you play this at the start of your turn, the rest of your hand is better. And it can plausibly make a meaningful impact. This is not like a perfect world scenario. You could swap out a strike for a Dagger Spray. All of a sudden, things are looking a little rosier. You could swap out a defend for a survivor. All of a sudden, things are looking a little rosier, you know? I really think you don't want to build your deck around these, but I'm almost never upset to see this get drawn. So I would call this a 3 as well. Plus, you need the damage early. Now, I've kind of been skirting around this. Poison is a very interesting... It's not an I don't want to say the word archetype. It's a bad word. It's a 4-letter word in the Slay the Spire community. Poison is a temptress. Poison was an element of our winning A20 run. There were a lot of elements. We also played like I think it was like a 20 energy skewer. But the poison allowed us to kill the first phase of the boss while saving that 20 energy via Ice Cream, Artivore, etc., etc., etc. But anyway, I think poison is very feast or famine. I'm going around the bushes here, but you kind of get... Yeah, I'll get to my point eventually. I don't even know when it's going to end. There's nothing worse than having a bunch of poison in hand, against an enemy who has like 3 debuff protections, you know? You're paying a whole turn's worth of energy just to be able to hurt him next turn, ideally. But it's also, I feel like Deadly Poison is maybe not the worst of the poison cards, but not necessarily among the best. But I would still probably, if I have no direction for the deck and we're still flexible early on, you got to think of the classic formula, you know? What is 5 poison damage? Well, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 poison damage. So it's 15 poison damage. It's poison level times poison level plus 1 divided by 2. 5 times 6 divided by 2. 15 damage. Now, to be fair, it's 15 damage over 5 turns. So, you know, you get really diminishing returns at that point, unless you got a long fight. If you're planning on the fight going 3 turns, then it's, you know, 5, 4, 3, which is still, it's 12 damage over 3 turns for 1 energy. It's pretty good. Where it really shines, obviously, it needs a supporting cast, you know? Catalyst is huge. That's really the big one. Obviously, it can get relic support. Noxious Fumes is a really cheap and good engine to keep enemies, you know, deteriorating. But I would say Deadly Poison is probably at a 1 level, but that's not unplayable. Keep in mind, I'll maybe give it a 2 because I want to save some room to give some 0s if necessary. But it's a 2 where you really want to be careful with where you're going with this because it can be completely useless in a lot of circumstances, unfortunately. Deflect. Yo, straight up. Deflect, I would be inclined to give this a 3 to 4. It's free block, which is worth something. Dex scaling as the silent. It's like a little brother version of Frost Focus is the defect. You can scale your decks with you know, footworks and ideally something like kunai, etc., etc. And get to the point where basically no enemy can ever hit you. Once you get late enough into the game, ideally at least. But even early, as long as you have draw in your deck, I think Deflect is a card that I would consider adding in many, if not most, circumstances. So, I mean, it's a very simple card to evaluate. You know, you could, by the time you upgrade it, which is fairly conceivable, depending on how thick your deck is, or if you get like an Apotheosis or something like that, you're getting, you know, 4 to 7 block for free, and you're playing a card, and if you're drawing with stuff like Dagger Throw and Acrobatics, this is really what you want to get for at least like a mild thumbs up. You're like, okay, you know, I drew 4 block. It makes Dagger Throw even better. I might give this a 4, honestly. And similarly, Dodge and Roll is close. Dodge and Roll, to be honest, I'm going to give it a 3, but with deck scaling and knowledge of the game, which I'm not necessarily saying I have, it gets so much better. Like, this is a 3 to 5, basically. The thing is, with Dodge and Roll, 2 things really benefit you. Because by default, it is worse than a basic strike. But 2 things benefit you. Dex, or deck scaling. So if you played a footwork in advance, all of a sudden you get, you know, 6 or 7 block this turn and next turn. The other thing is a knowledge of the enemy you're facing. You know, if you know you're fighting the Lagavulin, and this turn he's going to hit you for 20, and next turn he's going to hit you for 20, I would play this over a basic defend any day of the week, obviously. If you're fighting the Lagavulin, you know this turn he's hitting you for 20, next turn he's giving you a debuff, you play a basic defend over this. So it does have a little bit of there's a fudge factor for, you know, pilot error. And to be honest, I might just play the dodge roll mindlessly regardless. At the end of the day, it's probably only 1 block difference. But if you use this adeptly, this can be a very, very useful tool in the toolbox. You basically are getting 2 defense for the price of 1 when relevant. You're getting like 1.8 defense for the price of 1. 1.6, anyway. It's good. Flying Knee, on the other hand, is a card that's very easy for me to overrate. I would probably say this is at the 2 level, and I'm leaning towards 1. There's one, you always look at this and you go, perfect world scenario. In my brain, it has this weird bias where if I don't like something and it's just a little bit better than a strike, I go, well, it's only a little bit better than a basic strike. If I like something and it's better than a strike, I go, well, it's like a strike, but even better. And that's Flying Knee, you know? It does more damage than a basic strike. Next turn, you gain energy. The only thing I'm going to say about this, and I could be totally wrong, in most circumstances, energy this turn is worth more than energy next turn. On this turn, I could kill you. I could block. I could play a power that's going to make the rest of the fight even easier. Next turn, I might draw 5 curses. I might draw 5 strikes when the enemy can't be hit because they have too much block. I might draw 5 defends when they're not even attacking. So having energy and flexibility on the current turn, I value a lot more. But Flying Knee, I will say, I think it can be useful, especially early on, before you have the opportunity to pick up an energy relic. I might not hesitate to add like one of these to an 820 deck, but any more than that, I think, is asking for trouble, just because the defense is pretty, or the offense, I should say, is pretty low. Similarly, Outmaneuver, it's kind of in the same boat. I would give this a 1 with no remorse. And this, I'll fully admit, it's a card I might not understand, and I never really use productively. I almost never add even one of these to my deck, so I'm unqualified to examine this card. Most of the time, it depends on your draw. If you have enough draw and enough energy, then sure, you play an Outmaneuver, and next turn, you probably get 2 for the price of 1. But, I don't know. I'd almost always rather play something that's immediately useful than invest in my next turn, but I might just be incorrect. So I'm going to call something for you here. Right off the bat, I disrespected the Christ out of Piercing Wail. I'm going to go ahead and say that Piercing Wail is a 5 out of 5 card. This doesn't mean, especially at common level, this doesn't mean you're going to add 5 Piercing Wails to your deck. It doesn't mean you're going to add a Piercing Wail every time you get the opportunity. But I feel like 1 or 2 Piercing Wails, in a large enough deck at least, is like a no-brainer. The absolute worst case scenario for this is dead draw. You know, you draw a Piercing Wail against one enemy who's not attacking. Okay. It'll happen, but it'll stay in your deck. The best case scenario happens all the time. You go up against the Hexaghost. It's probably unupgraded by that point. You go up against the Hexaghost on floor 1. All of a sudden, his big turn, he does 0 damage. Gives you a huge amount of sustain. You go up against the Guardian. You know? Even if you only play it on a turn where he's not hitting you multiple times, you're still getting 6 block for 1. It's not great, but it's playable for sure. But when it shows up in the dream scenario, it's amazing. And moreover, it's easier than you think to make it show up in the dream scenario. You just add a well-laid plans to your deck, and then you hold it until a bad turn, if you draw it too early for it to be useful. It happens all the time. It's easy. Moreover, super helps you out in the early game when AoE is a nightmare. Even in the mid game, wrecks the birds if you can play it on a good turn. I would add one of these to my deck in pretty much every circumstance. Moreover, is one of my greatest regrets is the Silent, that I disrespected this card, thinking that it was a perfect world scenario to make it work, when in reality, any situation in which it can work is basically good enough in my opinion. So I'll give Piercing Wail a 5. Poison Stab is another very interesting card. I'm very tempted to just be, not dismissive, but like flippant about it. If you're going to go for poison, take it. If you're not, don't take it. But I actually think, you know, it's 6 extra poison over 3 turns. So it's basically 12 damage over 3 turns for 1 energy. It's pretty good compared to the stuff you might have in your deck early. Basically, the other benefit here that I feel I personally didn't notice that much is that it's a strike that also purges an artifact, or purges, you know, the ability for an enemy to avoid a debuff. I would actually be inclined to think of this as like a 2. I like the, versus Deadly Poison, I like the fact that it does a little bit of guaranteed damage, and also it applies less poison for sure. And I mean, it's a lot less poison. It's 9 less poison, but it also does 6 guaranteed damage. 9 less poison damage, I should say. 12 versus... wait a minute, no, am I dumb? No, 6 versus 15. It is 9. Anyway, I like that it has a little bit of, like, you know, scalar damage, and then a little bit of damage that ticks down, plus purges an artifact, maybe. But you have to be in the right line to do it, really. I might add, you know, one of these to the deck early enough if it shows up. I don't think it's that bad. Prepared? Used to think this card was, like, basically, why would you ever not take it? Now I'm like, I'll give it a 3. It's kind of like a dagger throw. Well, I mean, it's literally dagger throw, but minus the 9 damage and the energy cost. Upgraded, it becomes substantially better. I can't stress enough, being able to discard your 2 worst cards and draw 2 cards that hopefully will be better is worth something. And then you got to throw on top of that, there's a lot of silent cards, particularly something like Choke, but also Thousand Cuts, that benefit you just for playing cards over and over. You know, the thing is, it's bad if you have Velvet Choker, but you're probably not going to be playing a deck with Velvet Choker on 820 unless you're a madman or 10 times smarter than me. So I don't know if that's necessarily a germane criticism at this point. Sure, if you build into that line, notice I'm saying line instead of archetype, even though in my brain they mean the same thing right now. You don't want to run up against the Timekeeper, but, well, that's what your Piercing Whale's for. So, I'd be inclined to put this at a 2 or a 3 level. I definitely 1. More than that, maybe not, but Quick Slash. I love it. By love, I mean, it's a 2. Keep in mind, we got a lot of great cards coming up. I'm saving some room at the top end. I just think there's a lot of easy-to-see upside here. You know, 12 damage for 1 is really good if you can upgrade it. Normally, you'd probably go for an upgrade that gives you a little bit more than just 4 extra damage, but I can't deny it does make this card into a much better option, and the fact that it replaces itself in your hand, especially if you got a lot of realistic, you know, 0 energy card possibilities, is very helpful. So, yeah, again, you don't hesitate to add something like this early. It gives you, you know, being able to draw into, well, anything good, but let's just perfect world it. If we could draw into Neutralize, Deflect, you know, Piercing Whale, etc., really helps you out. Not going to win you the game, but certainly early on it could kill an elite or help you kill an elite that could help you win the game later. Slice is like the one exception where I'm like, I just don't like it. It's a little better than a Shiv, and it doesn't exhaust, but I just feel like it's not necessarily fair, but whenever I draw this card, I'm just like, man, this could have been, it could have been something else. I'm giving it a 1. It is free damage, but it's so easy to generate Shivs, and yeah, not for 0, but still, you know, to get some other benefit and generate Shivs simultaneously. Okay, dude, we're like a third of the way through here. Sneaky Strike is pretty simple. I tried to force this many times. Sneaky Strike is like a 1 or a 4. Well, it's like a 0 or a 4. You should not take it if you can't reliably discard. That's just easy. And I'll go so far as to say, having a Survivor does not count as a reliable discard, in my experience. But if you already have Tools of the Trade, which is draw 1, discard 1 at the start of every turn, or you have Gambling Chip as one of your rare starting relic, then I think a Sneaky Strike is a really good card to add. You're going to get that 10 damage for free a lot of the time. But I very much overrated this card. I don't actually think you build around it. I don't think it's good enough. When it works, it feels amazing. But what I found happen a lot of the time is by the time I got the discards out and played Sneaky Strike, I had 2 extra energy in hand, but I didn't have any other cards to play. So that's... I'm not denying you can get use out of this, but for the most part, the fact that it's free, oftentimes you end up getting a refund, but you got nothing to buy with it, is my experience. Sucker Punch, I think, is very good. I would probably put this again at like at maybe a 3 level, but leaning towards a 4 because it shows up all the time. The fact that basically a Sucker Punch, particularly upgraded, and the damage is whatever, but the extra weakness is awesome. The Sucker Punch combined with Neutralize in a deck that's under, like, you know, let's say 20 cards, you can basically keep an enemy permanently weak. You can bleed off their artifacts ASAP. And you can do some pretty decent damage while you do it. So this is a card I probably don't need to proselytize too much. I'm sure you're going to be like, I'm aware that this is pretty good. It's a good card. I might not hesitate, I should say, to add like 2 or even 3 of these, but I've tended on A20 to lean towards maybe like a 30 card deck size or greater, so keep that in mind. I think accuracy sucks, dude. And it's so easy to see the obvious situation where this would do amazing stuff for you. Infinite blades, accuracy, or multiple accuracies for that matter, upgraded, cloak and daggers, etc., etc. I get it. But all I'm going to say is that past like A15, I don't know if I ever successfully built a Shiv deck. My best results with Shivs were basically just making them an accessory to a more, you know, perhaps consistent archetype, if that makes sense. Shouldn't say the A word. Un momento, please. I'm back. All out attack. Just had a cough. It's a long video, dude. All out attack. I love it. Now, there's one thing I don't love. Discard 1 card at random. But apart from that, I actually would be inclined to say all out attack is closing in on a 5. The downside of discarding a card at random is admittedly pretty bad. Because sometimes you're gonna want to play all out attack before you play a card that you don't want to discard. A good example is like if you have Gremlin Horn, for example. You'll want to play all out attack to get a kill, probably, before you play something like maybe a Survivor as your best block. But still, AoE as the silent is not necessarily a common thing to find. I would definitely suggest taking almost as many of these as you can muster. That's my 2 cents on that subject.